What's up, guys? Welcome or welcome back to the channel. If you can't tell, I am super excited because this is season 1 of episode 1. If you're looking at me like, season who? Episode what? That's because you haven't seen my previous videos, so make sure you go check it out. I'll put a link to it somewhere above here. Today's video is the kickoff of things. In this season, we'll focus more on setting up things from scratch. So setting up our infrastructure, setting up everything from scratch, and then working our way up. And then we're moving into next season where we challenge ourselves a little bit more. We're going to talk about our server. We're going to talk about VMware, why I've decided to go with VMware. We're going to talk about setting up ESXi, VMware ESXi. Let's roll the intro clip. When we come back, we're going to talk about setting up our infrastructure. Let's go. You've been working in IT for a while, not unless you've been working under a rock. You most likely know what VMware is, because VMware pretty much dominates when it comes to virtualization. So VMware is a software company that helps business run multiple virtual computers on a single physical machine, kind of allowing them to optimize their IT infrastructure and reducing costs. That's one of the main reasons why I've decided to kind of switch over from Proxmox. I still use Proxmox, by the way. You would not. I will switch over to VMware to get to learning and understanding more, but you will not get me to get rid of Proxmox. I still have Proxmox installed on one of my smaller computers, and I use it in my home environment, and I'm going to use it forever. But I'm switching my big server, my main server, over to VMware. And then again, that's the reason why I've decided to switch it, because I want to learn that. I want to get to know it. I do touch it at work, but only at the level to which my job needs to be done. So I need to be able to know how to set it up, how to do certain things, and touch it a little bit more so I have a better understanding of it. So that's one of the reasons why I've decided to choose VMware. Okay, guys, so I wanted to give you guys a quick overview of the server. I've had this server for a while. I bought it when it was on sale. It's been a godsend when I want to understand concept, when I want to learn something. I have Proxmox installed on it, and it almost feels like a sad day that I have to switch over from Proxmox to VMware, but such is life. And I still have Proxmox installed on my other server. And before I even talk about this, I want to say that you don't necessarily need something like this. Again, I bought this when it was on sale. Actually, it was a lot more cheaper. You don't need something like this. You can get something smaller. You can get something that is affordable and still be able to do a lot of things that we're going to be doing here. So it's a Dell PowerEdge server. Again, it's a bit of on the big end, but they're so affordable now. Yeah, affordability is very subjective, but anyways, they're so affordable now on Amazon. You can go for refurbished ones, and they have cheaper version. So it has 100. This one has 192 gigs of RAM. It has iDRAC 7, which is great because it allows me to remote in and be able to do things on the computer. And it's been great because when I'm outside of the house, I can remote into my house and be able to turn it on, all that good stuff. So it has iDRAC installed on it. It has an onboard RAID controller as well. It has 4, this is the front. You guys can't see the front, but it has this guys right here, which you can just pretty much snap it and remove. It has 8 4TB SAS drive, which equates to about 32 TB. So these are gonna set up as a RAID, and then we're gonna be able to install all of our VMs on this guys right here. I also, when I initially set this up, again, if you want to see that video, we'll link it somewhere when I install Proxmox on it. I also bought an SSD, and I bought this case for this guy, which basically allows me to connect it here and then be able to install the Hypervisor OS on this guy, and then just use this guys for storage. So basically VMware is going to be installed on this SSD, and then we're going to use this guys as storage after we set up the RAID that we want to use and all that stuff. Again, it's nothing too crazy. It just allows you to be able to set up an environment that you can install as much stuff as you want. So this is basically what we're going to use as our core baseline for our infrastructure, and this is what we're going to build everything on top of. So again, quick overview. To wrap it up, you do not need this kind of stuff here. This is going overboard a little bit, but again, this has been money well spent for me because I bought it on sale, and it's just been so helpful when it comes to trying to understand concept. When I have to do something at work, because I said I had Proxmox installed here, I would just come here, build it, understand it, and I can build it easily at work. So it's been a godsend, and I think that anybody that's serious about IT, you have to have your lab environment. It doesn't have to be this fancy, but you have to have one. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this end of the video. You guys have seen the physical hardware. Now we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, guys, so now that we've seen the physical server and we've seen the different components of the server, now what we want to do next is we want to prep the server in terms of like the configuration for the server. So we want to look at things like the network settings. We want to look at things like the SATA settings, because we do have that SSD in there. So we want to make sure that the server is able to see that SSD, so we can install ESXi on that SSD. We also want to make sure we have the right config settings in terms of like network config settings, where we set up a static IP address. So if things don't change, because again, you're going to be accessing this server through your GUI and you're going to use the IP address to access it. So if that change and it's not static, then you might run into a problem wherein, well, it's not a static IP address and it changed and you don't know what the new IP address is, and you have to go into your DHCP. It's a pain. So you need to make sure your server, your IP address that's assigned to that particular server or your ESXi host is a static IP address, all of that good stuff. We also have to look at the RAID, see what RAID we want to use, and then set up that RAID. There's a whole bunch of settings that I feel like we need to take care of first before we move into the ESXi installation. So let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll move over to the ESXi. I cannot see that word for the life. Even if my life depends on it, I can't. It's such a short word, but it's such a word that's so hard to say. Anyways, let's go ahead and look at the config settings, and then we can move over to the ESXi. We're going to move over to the ESXi installation after that. Once the server come on, we're going to want to press either F2 or F11. I would say go with F2, and this might differ depending on the version of I'm going to pull the keyboard here because it makes it easier. This might differ depending on the version of server that you're running. To go into the BIOS settings and also the settings, the key that you might need to press might be different based on the server that you're using. I'm using a Dell server, so if you're using the same, it's pretty much the same. It takes some time for it to boot up, to do its thing. But once everything is good to go, you're going to see like on the top right hand corner here, you're going to see a variation of options that you can choose from to kind of get into where you want to get to. And that's where we want to press F2 to get us into the system setup. It takes some time to boot up, so just give it some time. Initializing iDRAC. And I've done this video where like I went through the physical lab itself, and you get to see me do it, all the stuff. I will link to it somewhere here. That's when I installed iDRAC on the server. So right here, we want to say F2. So we want to go ahead and click F2. It's going to go system setup. Now, if you press F11, it's going to take you into the BIOS setup, and then you're going to go to system setup. So I just say, it's a lot more easier to just press F2 instead to just take you directly into system setup. So it's going to do some more loading. We don't need this anymore. Again, I'm using iDRAC. If your server come with iDRAC, which I would say if you're buying something from Amazon, something like that, check it out and make sure the server comes with like an iDRAC license. It's extremely helpful when it comes to like accessing your computer remotely and turning things on, turning things off. It's a lot more helpful than having to physically do it or write something for it to do it. I'm going to get rid of the keyboard now. I don't need it anymore because I do have a physical keyboard connected, but I just wanted to show you guys the whole nine. If you don't have a keyboard connected, which I doubt that would be the case, then you can use this virtual keyboard to kind of navigate through things, help you up, down, F12 and all this other stuff. But I do, so I'm going to get rid of it. The setup. So now we're in the system setup. There are a couple of settings that we need to look at here. This is basically where you need to be to look at all the settings that you need to look at. We're going to go through each one and just kind of make sure everything is set up correctly. So the first thing that we're going to look at, let's go ahead and look at iDRAC setting. Again, if you don't have an iDRAC license, then you might not be able to set this up. But if you do, again, when you're buying something from Amazon, just kind of check and see if it has it. If it has it already, just buy it together. It makes it easy, instead of having to struggle through it. But one of the things that we want to do, we want to go into iDRAC settings. And a couple of things that we want to do here. If you just receive your server, the default iDRAC setting or the settings that was pre-configured, or if they reset it, it might still be pre-configured. So when you try to access your server it might still be configured. So when you try to access your server through iDRAC, whatever, and things like that, it's not going to work, right? It's going to tell you that like, hey, well, you're not going to be able to hit it because you don't know the IP address for the iDRAC at all, because you need to know the IP address assigned to your iDRAC NIC card, network adapter card, for you to be able to access it. Because remember, the iDRAC settings and the iDRAC NIC card is different from your server NIC card, so your network card. So the server itself has like several network cards that you can use for your lab environments and things like that. And then the iDRAC has its own NIC card specifically for the iDRAC, because that stays on, right? Even if the server is off, because it allows you to be able to access the server and turn things on. So that's the way it works. So once you're in here, you want to reset that. If it's you just got it, you can reset it to default and just clean things up a little bit so it makes it easier for you. And then what you want to do, you want to go into network settings and then click enter. And then in network settings, first of all, you want to enable the NIC for iDRAC here, right? Because if it's disabled, then you can't access it, obviously. And you can make some more changes in here if you want to, but the change that we mostly want to pay attention to is the IPv4, right? We want to enable IPv4, and then we want to disable DHCP, and then we want to assign our NIC card for our iDRAC controller static IP address. We're doing this because if you have DHCP enabled, the NIC card or the network controller for the iDRAC is going to pick up a different IP address, and once it does, you're not going to know that IP address. You're going to have to physically come into your server all the time to be able to find what IP address it is, and then you can use that IP address to access the iDRAC controller. So you don't want to do that all the time. Nobody wants to do that all the time. So what you want to do is you want to set this as a static IP address and disable DHCP. And one of the things to keep in mind is that just because you're assigning IP address here that's available on your network doesn't make it a static IP address. It's static in here because it doesn't change. However, if that IP address is not reserved on your whatever is giving out DHCP on your network, or that IP address is not excluded from the IP address that whatever is giving out DHCP on your network and assigned to devices that request IP address, then once the server goes off for a while and whatever is giving out DHCP on the network comes back and then check and see that this IP address is not being used by the server, that IP address might get assigned to something else. So it's very important to make sure that the IP address, I know it's kind of like a long rant, but it's very important to make sure that the IP address is either reserved on whatever is giving out DHCP on your network, or excluded from whatever is giving out DHCP on your network from giving that IP address to anything else before you can set it in here. But anyway, that's it for iDRAC. So we're going to get out of here. Another thing that we want to change, I already spoke about that. So we're going to get out of iDRAC. So iDRAC is done. If you do have iDRAC, you can change a whole bunch of other settings here, users configuration, smart card, and all this other stuff. But we're not doing none of that yet. So we're going to get out. Another settings that we want to go into is the system BIOS. So the system BIOS, we're going to check a couple of settings. As you kind of saw in the video where I talk about the physical server, we have an SSD that we're going to be using to install the OS or the hypervisor, the ESXi hypervisor. That's where we're going to install the hypervisor, and then all the other SAS drive on the server is going to be used for storage. If you just got your server, you want to make sure the SATA settings is enabled. So you want to go into SATA, and then you want to click on this guy, and then it's going to give you an option. So you can set a RAID mode if you have like some sort of like, I don't know, different SSD. So if you have server SSD similar to our SAS drives, then you can set some sort of RAID for that. If you have something that needs to run on some sort of compatibility mode, and I think you can choose the ATA mode for that. But we're going to choose the ESXi mode because we're using an SSD, and that's like the best one to use for an SSD. So when I initially got my stuff, it was off, so I had to set it on. If you don't set it on, if you don't choose a mode that you want it to run on, your server is not going to be able to see your SSD. Then, of course, during the installation, ESXi installation, you are not going to be able to install ESXi to that SSD. So once you do that, I think that's pretty much it for the SATA settings. It's a whole bunch of settings here. As you can see, I have a Samsung 500 gigs hard drive that I'm going to install things on. So once that's done, you can make other changes here if you want. I do not, and then click skip. Another settings that you want to look at is the integrated device. If you by chance want to use, because on the server, inside of the server, there's a USB drive in there. So if you're someone that's connecting USB everywhere to everything, and you feel like you want to use the internal USB, then you want to come in here and then you want to enable it. So you want to click on enable, because again, if you do not enable it, the server is not going to be able to see it. And if you connect anything to the internal USB, the server is going to see, I don't see it, and you can't use it. So if you want to use that, that's one thing to keep in mind as well. So a whole bunch of other stuff that you can play around with here, but normally I just enable it. So that is it for some of the server configuration. I think another thing that we need to look, we already looked at iDRAC. Another thing that we need to look at is the RAID controller. So if we go back here and we go to device settings, give it a couple of seconds here. Basically, what we're going to do here is we're going to set up our RAID controller. So we're going to set up a virtual disk, and that disk is going to be used for our storage. What we were looking for is the integrated RAID controller. And here we have the virtual disk management, we have the physical disk, and we have the enclosure management. No, going to worry about that much. The physical disks, if we just click on it, I'm just going to go into, we don't necessarily need to do anything in here. Go to virtual disk properties. Should I actually go to physical disk first? Here you can see the properties, you can see the virtual disk, and you can see all the properties for that. You can get out of that. Physical disk, here you can see all of our physical disk. You can see the physical disk, and then you can force it to blank, you can force it to go offline, and all that good stuff. If we click on that, we get to see all of our disk. It tells us how many disks we have, and it tells us how much space is in each disk. We can remove that disk, we can blink, we can do all kind of stuff for that, for those physical disks and things like that. Go back. And the next thing we want to look at is we want to look at virtual disk management. And then you can do select virtual disk operation, manage virtual disk property. I think that's what we just got into, right? So, select virtual disk operation. And then here, once you click on that, in here, you can delete a virtual disk. So in my case, as you can see, I've already created a virtual disk. And this is the virtual disk that just kind of combine all of those other disks and then treats it as one. And it gives us this huge space for us to use and store our stuff, and just makes it a lot more easier for us to kind of just have this. Because once we start building things in this season, we're going to need a lot of space. I don't ever think that we're going to ever run out of space, but we're going to need like, we have a lot of space. We're going to need a big amount of space to be able to do all of the things that we want to do. So, so since we're doing a clean installation, you can do something like delete, and then it's going to tell you, are you sure you want to delete it? Because then it's going to wipe out everything in this disk. Then you say yes, and then you say yes, and it's like, okay, well, and it's gone. And oh man, and then it's going to tell you there's no virtual disk in the system, because of course we've deleted that. So once you go back and then come back in, you should be able to see the create disk, and as you can see, all of the other options here kind of grayed out, not kind of, they're actually grayed out. They're grayed out, so you can't do anything with them because you've already somewhat deleted that disk. So you click enter. Just one thing to keep in mind is that if your disk have a lot of data on it, or it has like a whole bunch of stuff on it, it might take some time for the server to get rid of it. So just keep that in mind. So once you're here, you can go in here and then you can do create your RAID, select what you want to call the disk, and then kind of select the virtual disk size unit that you want to use, and all this other different settings. There's one more way that I want to show you guys, which I think it's cleaner than having to go through the CLI, which is iDRAC. If you do have iDRAC, this is the quickest way to do it. But if you don't have iDRAC, this is the other way to do it, right? This is the CLI way to do it through the CLI, and you're able to kind of like delete all of the things that you need to do and clean things up. But if you don't, there's another way that you can do it through iDrag, and it's just a lot more clean in my opinion. So let's take a look at that. So in my opinion, this is the cleanest way to kind of go through the configuration. It's clean, it's easy, it just makes your life a lot more easier. It's kind of cleaner than going through the CLI, but I wanted to show the CLI anyway for those of you guys that don't have an iDrag license or don't have iDrag that come with your server. You can do it that way. For this, it's pretty clean. Like I showed you guys earlier, if you already set up your iDrag, all you have to do is just hit that IP address. Just make sure that the server is on the same network as the computer that you're using to kind of navigate to that IP address. So when you put an IP address on your browser, just make sure that computer that you're using is on the same network as your iDrag server, so it's able to see it. Once you put that IP address in, click enter. It's going to take you to the iDrag controller, and then you should be able to log in, and then you can see the section right here. You have different components, but what we're looking for basically is just storage. Want to go to virtual disk, you can go to physical disk. In the physical disk, you can see all of your physical disk. You want to go virtual disk, you have controller, you have enclosure, you have all of this other settings, but we want to do physical disk. So you can see it's very similar to the same stuff that we're going through in the CLI. So now we see that we have one physical disk and we have all of the properties of the physical disk, right? So we want to go up here. You can click manage, you can click identify, you can click create. I'm just realized that I'm not letting things load. So you can click create to create a new virtual disk. Again, very straightforward. You can select your different settings here, and then all the stuff that you want to select, similar to the CLI, but just cleaner. And then you can click manage. And if you already have a physical disk, you can go to this physical disk and you can say, hey, I want to delete this physical disk, or whatever it is that you want to do to it. You can delete it, initialize full, initialize fast, whatever you want to do to it, you can go ahead and do it in this section right here. This is the cleanest way that I found to do it, and it just makes your life a lot more easier. So if you want to delete it, you can just click delete. It's going to give you a whole bunch of warning like you would when you went through it on the CLI, and then you can press OK if you want to do so. I'm going to click cancel here. But that's pretty much it. And once you're done, you can create a new virtual disk. And the reason why we're doing this again is so that when we're installing ESXi, we can install ESXi on our SSD, and then on the physical drive, we can say on the virtual disk that we created, that's a combination of all of our SAS drive. We can use that for storage, adding VMs, building things, and learning concept. So anyways, I just wanted to kind of highlight that this is the cleanest way to do that. And that's pretty much it for as far as the server configuration goes. Okay, guys, so we're pretty much done with all of the configs for the server. The next step is to install VMware on the server. So to do that, before we do that, actually, I do want to kind of make it clear that VMware ESXi or vSphere ESXi is not free. It's a paid software, obviously, because they need to make money. So what they do is the first 60 days is free. So you're gonna have to create an account and then register and do all of that good stuff. They're gonna need your name. They're gonna need your social security. No, I'm just kidding. It's a very quick account. You put your name, email, and all that stuff, and then you're able to download the software, the ISO, for free. And you can use the full feature, everything, full version for 60 days. And after 60 days, you're going to have to get some sort of subscription. They have different subscription level that you can use. It's not cheap, right? I guess for some people, yeah, it might be affordable. For some people, it's not. It's very expensive. So there's the yearly stuff, I think. And then there's the stuff where you can buy the perpetual one. Wherein you don't get a newer version that comes out, but whatever version that you bought is, you're gonna have that version forever. So yeah, I mean, I want to sit here and say it's an affordable thing. It really is not, but it's a business. They have to make money, and for me, I'm at the point where it makes sense for me to get it and learn a little bit more. I was quite hesitant to get it, actually. So I love Proxmox, man. But at some point you have to learn how to use this stuff, so it makes sense for me to get it. But anyway, I wanted to get that out of the way before we get into the installation process. Let's get to it. Okay, guys, so we've already done the work of getting our getting our server ready. So we've already prepped our bare metal server, get it ready, do some of the basic configurations that we need right now. As time goes on, of course, we're going to probably make some more configuration to that. But we've already done the groundwork already for the foundational work already for things to get ready for us to install ESXi. So now we want to download the ESXi ISO. We want to download the ESXi software, the VMware ESXi Hypervisor software, to be able to install that on our server so we can start using it, right? So to do that, we want to go to VMware. We want to go to vmware.com, pretty straightforward. Click on products. They have a whole bunch of products. And then I'm telling you, VMware pretty much dominate when it comes to virtualization, seriously. So understanding how it works it's very beneficial. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing it. So you want to go to vSphere or vSphere Plus. You want to click on Start Trial. Again, just to iterate, it's going to open a new page. There's a 60 days trial. You can use the full license for 60 days, but after 60 days, you're going to need to pay for it. I have the full license. Reason being that, as I said, VMware just pretty much dominates when it comes to virtualization, and knowing how it works is just, it will help you grow. Again, not to be a broken record. That's one of the reasons why I chose it, to kind of start this whole hands-on lab process that I'm going through in this phase of my career, instead of Proxmox, even though I still use Proxmox. So here you can see, give you installation and use cases. You can see the license. If you're already logged in, it's going to show you all of that information here. And it tells you here you have 60 days, and you're going to use the latest product. The thing about this is that a lot of companies are not even using 8. Right? They're using probably a previous version of vSphere. Reason being that you don't just take a current version and add it to your production environment, because that might probably ruin things. So you want to kind of validate. So I'm using 8 because why not? Slowly, a lot of people are going to start moving to 8 anyway. So that's the version that I have. So once you do that, if you're not already logged in, you're going to have to log in. If you don't have an account, you're going to have to create an account. And then once you do that, you're going to go to license and download. And then here, you should be able to see what you need to see to be able to say like, hey, I can download what I need to download and go from there. So yeah, that's pretty much straightforward. I'm not gonna log in on anything. I want you guys it's like login please so I can see your license key. So you pretty much log in, and once you log in, you should be able to see that information. My license key will probably expire because I use a different account anyways for that. But once you log in, you should be able to see the information here. Again, it's pretty straightforward. You see the information here. There's a little download button. You click on download, and then you can just go from there, download it, and then we're going to go through the process now of bonding the ISO to a USB drive. Step is pretty straightforward. So basically what we want to do now is we want to bond the ISO that we just downloaded from VMware, the ESXi or the vSphere ISO. We want to bond that to a USB drive, and we're going to use that USB drive connected to the server, and then we're going to boot from that USB drive to install ESXi on the server. There's another way to do it as well. If you don't want to bond, that you want to go through the process of bonding the ISO to a USB drive, there's another way to do it if you have iDRAC. But if you don't, this is the way to do it. So it's pretty straightforward. I'm using Etcher. Etcher is my go-to when it comes to bonding things to USB drive. You can use also Rufus. Rufus is also pretty good. It also allows you to bond things to USB drive as well, but both of them are free, so you can choose whichever one you want. I'm using Etcher. Etcher is pretty straightforward. So basically what you want to do is you want to just kind of select the ISO that you just downloaded. So if you click the plus sign here, it's going to give you an option to select that ISO. So wherever you download that ISO, you can just select it from there. And then here you have to have a USB drive, of course, connected to your computer. And then you're going to select the USB drive. It's going to tell you the space, and then that's pretty much it. And once you do, you just click flash. It's going to start going through the process. And once the process is completed, you can just take that USB drive and you're going to connect it directly. I just got a prompt. So one of the things to keep in mind is that once you do this, you're going to receive a prompt that say, hey, Etcher wants to bond your ISO to your USB drive. You just want to click yes and give it the permission to actually just keep that in mind. And once that's done, it'll go through the process. And once the process is completed, you're pretty much done. And you're going to use that USB drive, connect it to one of the USB port on your server, and we're going to boot from that USB drive to install ESXi on the server. Okay, so now we've downloaded it. We have an ISO. Our ISO image is bound to USB. You're going to take that USB drive and you're going to connect that USB drive to your server. You can use any other USB port on the front or on the back. You can use any of those USB ports. You just need to make sure that USB is connected to your server. So go ahead and do that, and let's go ahead and move on to the next step where we're going to boot up the server, and we're going to boot from that USB drive that we just stick in the server, and then we're going to install VMware through that. So let's go. Okay guys, so we are at the last section of the video. So this section, basically we're going to install vSphere ESXi on the server. So before we do it, there are a couple of things that we need to do. So there's two ways that we can, what is one thing that we need to do? We need to be able to get the ISO to the server. So there's two ways that we can do that. The first way is by doing what we did earlier. We bond the ISO to a USB drive, and then we take that physical USB drive, connect it to the server, and then boot from that USB drive. Boot from the USB drive, and then the server will be able to see the ISO, and then we can go through the ESXi installation. If you don't have a USB drive, which would be surprising, or you don't want, actually that's not surprising, sometimes you just don't know where you put your USB drives, or you don't want to go through the process of bonding the ISO to the USB drive, and you have iDRAC, you can directly attach the ISO to your server and then map that as a virtual drive and be able to boot into that virtual drive. And then from there, you can go through the installation process. So before we do that, actually, I want to show you guys something real quick on the iDRAC homepage. If you don't have the iDRAC, the concept is pretty much the same. You go through the CLI, make this change. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to go into setup. So again, very similar if it's in the CLI, you go through system setup and you'll be able to see this option there. So what we want to do is we want to change the force boot device option. So basically what this is that if you boot up your server get to look at that device first before it looks at any other device, right? So if you booting up the server and you're saying that like, hey, I have a USB drive connected to the server, if you boot into your, let's say your SSD drive first, the server is going to boot to that SSD drive, and because there is some sort of like an OS on that SSD drive, it's going to go through that OS and boot that OS up, when it's not going to go to your USB drive because there's already something that it's already boot up, and that's going to take precedence over anything else that come after it. So what we want to do is we want to tell our server, hey, we have a virtual drive or we have a USB drive. I want you to boot into that drive first. So once it boots into that drive, it's going to see the ESXi ISO or the ESXi image and all those other things that it needs to boot in from, and it's going to boot from that drive, and then we're going to go through the installation. You want to make that change because if you don't, and you have some sort of other drive on the server, it's going to boot through that drive first, and it's never going to get to your USB or your virtual drive. I hope that makes sense. So if you have, let's say if we're going the USB route, we have an ISO on our USB, right? We'll connect that USB to our physical server, our bare metal server. We're going to choose this option, right? And this option is going to say, look for the removable drive first, boot into that first, and let's go through the ISO installation. If there's something in that drive, let's go through that. If there's not, move on to the other one. I'm going to be using a virtual, so I'm going to say virtual CD and ISO, and click apply. All right. And now what we want to do is we want to boot the server. Actually, before boot the server, I'm going to go to server. Again, this setting is something that you can do through the CLI. So go through the CLI system setup and be able to see boot order. You can set whatever boot order you want it to go by. So now we're going to go back to the server. We're going to launch the virtual console, and we're going to attach our ISO. So we're going to click on launch here. Again, this is iDRAC, depending on how I have for you guys, but it's iDRAC controller. Okay, so now we're in the iDRAC controller. Again, I don't want you to get confused. I don't want someone to get confused. there's two ways that you can do it. One is either you go through the USB route, which I showed you guys earlier, bond the ISO to USB, connect the USB physically to the server, boot into that USB drive and go through the installation. Or if you have iDRAC, you're going to come in here, you're going to click on this guy right here that says connect virtual media, and we're going to map our ISO to a virtual drive on the server, and we're going to boot from that. So again, we're going to click on choose, right? And we're going to choose our VMware ISO that we downloaded from VMware. To boot up, we're going to select that. We're going to click open, and then we're going to say map drive. And now this is a virtual drive that up to our server. So now if we click X, you don't need to do anything, just click X. If you were to come back in there, it's still map. It doesn't get on map until you restart or on map or disconnect virtual drive. So once you do that, now we're going to go back and then we're going to boot up the server. We're going to boot up the server, say okay. And then we're going to bring this guy back up. I'm going to make this bigger. And you can see the server is booting up. Now, this is going to take, it's going to go through its boot up process. I don't want to sit here and then bore you guys with all the process it's going to go through. It's going to go through its boot up process. But at the end of the day, once it's go through all of its check everything and make sure everything check out, it's going to boot into our virtual CD. Because remember, if we go back here, for example, when we did setup, we told it to boot into the virtual CD drive first. So it's going to boot into the virtual CD drive, and then we're going to go from there. Just keep that in mind. So I'm going to let it go through its thing. And once that's done, once it's on the page where it's putting through the stuff, I'm going to come back. I don't want to bore you guys. Okay, so as you can see, it's starting to boot up from our virtual drive. And now it's starting to go through the ESXi installation. The installation in itself seems to take a little bit longer, so it's kind of going through the whole installation and it's loading stuff. So I'm going to give it a couple of minutes to do what it needs to do. This is always the fun part, the waiting part of things. So this is going to take a couple of minutes. Again, I'm just going to kind of, this basically just means that ESXi is pretty much, I mean, VMware is trying to tell you that like, hey, the version that your server version is a little bit older in terms of like the compatibility for the ESXi 8.0 installation. You might want to exit and get a better server, so to speak, and then be able to install ESXi on it. Or you can continue and then take the risk. So this is it's technically, for me, of course, this is a live environment, so I don't really care. So I'm going to go ahead and say continue, because again, it's a live environment and I know the risk and I'm not too worried about it. So I'm going to go ahead and say continue, and then we can go through the installation, right? So if you have a production environment or some other environment that's much more critical, maybe you might want to think about that, because in the future, maybe VMware is not going to come out with some sort of update for the server or the CPU version and things like that that you have on your server. They might not come up with an update for it, and that might be an issue. So that's something to think about. But again, for me, this is a live environment, so it doesn't really matter to me. So I'm going to go ahead and continue anyways. So once you press enter, it's going to tell you, it's going to give you the risk, the warning, terms and condition, and all this other stuff that you have to read. So once you read that, nobody ever reads that. Once you read that, if you want to read the whole thing, they're going to ask for everything that you own, and things like that. And you're going to press F11 to continue. So I'm going to go ahead and click F11. So it's going to go through the process of like scanning available devices and all this other stuff. And then the installation is going to continue. So now it's telling you like, hey, I saw 2 drives. So remember, when we went through the setup, we have our our virtual, we have our virtual drive, right? And then we have our physical SATA drive, which is about 500 GB. So when we talked about it earlier, we said we want to install ESXi on the SSD, which is the 500 GB. And then we want to use this guy right here for just basically storage and setting up our virtual machine and going through the whole process. So it's basically asking us, where do you want to install? What do you want the ESXi software to be installed, the ESXi OS to be installed? I'm going to tell it to install it on the SSD. So I click enter, and it's going to say gather in some information. Again, our virtual disk is our virtual disk. Our SSD is solely dedicated, and that's why I kind of separate the two, solely dedicated for the ESXi OS. So you say you selected this disk, blah, 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 and it's going to tell you that if you do that, the disk will be overwritten. So everything that you have on this disk will be cleaned out. So just make sure you keep that in mind. So, of course, I'm fine with that. So I'm going to go ahead and click enter to say OK. And it says select the keyboard layout. I am in US default, obviously. Where is, I'm gonna go down the list. I'm curious. Oh man, that's a lot of country. Okay. I was curious to how many countries are in there, but just select US default. And then of course it's gonna ask you for a root password. This password is very important because this is the password that you're going to use to log into the GUI once the installation is done. So it's very important for you to remember this password, because if you don't remember the password, you can't log into the GUI. So just keep that in mind. So I'm gonna go ahead and type in the password. I'm gonna tell you guys that. I'm not gonna tell you guys the password. I'm just joking. All right, go ahead. Okay, that's our password match. I'm gonna click enter to continue. It's gonna give us another warning. Blah. So again, like I was saying, right? So this is something that you have to keep in mind. Again, for me, this is a lab environment, so it doesn't really matter to me. I'm using it to learn, to grow, to build things, to kind of help myself grow a little bit more. But if this is some sort of production environment, if it's an environment where you have to somewhat upgrade things consistently and you want the latest update that comes out from VMware for ESXi 8.0.0, you might not want to go through this. You might want to get a different physical server or different bare metal server that is supported by ESXi. So basically it's telling me the CPU and this host are not supported by ESXi 8.0.0. You can override and force install, but is not officially supported nor recommended. Again, lab environment doesn't mean much to me. I might encounter some problems in the future, but again, we'll find a way around it. But just keep that in mind, all right? So for me, again, this is a lab environment, so I'm just gonna go ahead and click enter to continue. Again, are you sure? Man, they're making sure. They're asking you server time. Are you sure? It's like, yeah, I'm sure. What am I gonna do? Buy another server? Not doing that. We'll use what we have. So we're gonna go ahead and click enter. And then it's gonna ask you again. It's gonna give you kind of like the breakdown. It's gonna be installed on this disk. Things are gonna be wiped out. So yes, if you want to continue, back if you don't want to continue, all the good stuff. I do want to continue, so I'm going to say F11, and then it's going to go through the installation. The installation in itself is not all that difficult. But just understanding, because part of this series is not just to kind of like do things for me. Some of these I've already been through before, and as we go on, it's going to get challenging, so I can challenge myself. So I don't want to just do things anymore. I want to kind of document the whole process and make sure I have a better understanding of each and every section that I'm going to go through, because that's how you build foundation, you know. So building things one brick at a time, laying one brick at a time, and then just kind of growing your knowledge from there. But then just do it to say I've done it. Do it to say I've done it and I understand it. And that's why I'm documenting everything. And I'm going through the whole process in itself. And that's why the installation is pretty quick, but understanding every step of the way, why we do things, the static IP, the physical server and all that stuff is very important. So let's let it go through its thing, and I'll be back once everything is good to go. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So it's telling us that, hey, you've successfully installed. I do have, as you can see here, this is the 60 days evaluation. When you download stuff, it tells you this is the 60 days evaluation period. And then of course you're going to need a license. I do have the license. Eventually I'm going to end the license to kind of have all these features, but it tells you all of the stuff that you have to do here. And then also you have to make sure once we boot it up, you're going to see the static IP address that it's assigned to it and all that stuff. But for now, you can see that everything is installed. And then it's telling you to remove the installation media before you're booting. So what we want to do is just go back to virtual. In your case, if you have a physical USB attached to the server, you just want to go and disconnect that. In our case, we're just on map because we did a virtual one. If I can see this stuff now, I have to move it. Move this up here. Actually, you know what? Just click yes. So we're on map. We've removed that. And then now we can say X. If we go back in there, should be nothing in there anymore. And you can say yes as well if you want to. And then you can say enter to reboot. So now the system is just going to go through and reboot stuff. The restart has been completed, so it's now taking us to the VMware homepage on the main host itself, on the server itself. So here you can see it tells us that I have a DNS entry for this IP address, and this IP address, even though it's DHCP, I do have a reservation on my DHCP server on my network to always assign this IP address to my to this server. So that's one way to do it. We'll talk about this a little bit more on the next video. I don't want to make this video a little bit long, but anyway, the installation is complete. You can press F2 to be able to look at some of the settings. It's going to ask you for the password. And then once you enter the correct password for the root, this is the password that you set during the installation. It gives you a couple of settings here to change things, to view log, to do all the things that you need to do. So ideally, I'm going to click escape one more time here. Ideally, if we go to this guy, we should be able to log in. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate to that guy, go ahead and log in. And I'm going to bring this up so you guys can see it. So once I bring that up, it should look something like this. So again, I do have DNS entry for this guy. So basically it's this IP address, and the DNS entry basically just kind of allows me to not remember the IP address and be able to use a domain name instead of like a actual IP address. So as you can see, looks a lot more nicer. We finally got everything up and running. I'm pretty excited about that. So basically phase one is pretty much done, means that we have a kind of backbone, so to speak, up and running. So now we can start doing a whole bunch of stuff. So we have ESXi, as you can see, it's saying that, hey, you have 60 days, and before that 60 days expire, you should enter your license. I'm not going to go through all of that in this video. Next video, this is the vSphere client. So in the beginning of the video, remember I talked about having the GUI interface for the vSphere client, and then you have the vCenter client, which allows you to manage multiple of these, which is the ESXi. So this is the vSphere client. This is what it looks like. On the next video, we're going to talk about some of the configuration settings that we're going to go through. We're going to talk about installing vCenter so we can access this through vCenter instead of the vSphere client. We don't necessarily need it, but I also do have the vCenter license, so it makes sense if you want to host. If in the future I have like several different ESXi hosts in my environment, I should be able to add it to my vCenter. So again, this is the vSphere client. We're done for this video. We've set up our server. We've installed ESXi. Next video, we're going to install vCenter, and we're going to go through some of the basic configuration. Okay, guys, so that's pretty much it. So in this video, we talk about VMware, why we've decided to go with VMware for infrastructure, hypervisor, software. We've talked about what VMware is, different components, and we've went through the ESXi installation and configuration, all of that good stuff. We talk about our server. So our infrastructure level is coming along, right? It's starting to look pretty, it's starting to look nice. We're starting to make some moves. So in the next video, I don't want to make this video too long. In the next video, we're going to talk about installing vCenter. Setting up in the next episode. I should start saying that. In the next episode, we're going to talk about installing vCenter, looking at our ESXiOS configuration, to look at some of the configuration, look at some of the changes that we need to make, and start to get to understand that layer a little bit more, and kind of configure it to kind of suit our needs and some of the things that we're going to do. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. If you've enjoyed the video, of course, and you like videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button, make sure you hit the thumbs up button, say what's up in the comment box below. I will try my very best to say hi back. At least I will give you a heart or something like that in the comment. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys in the next one. It's going to be fun. I'm pretty excited about this whole season and episode things, like all those videos that are coming up. We're going to fail together. We're going to learn together. We're going to break things together. It's an exciting time for me. So make sure you hit the thumbs up button and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. As always, don't forget to stay geeking. Peace.